This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, the weekly podcast and vodcast, I suppose, where myself and Rob Staten of Seahawks Draft Blog talk about the NFL mock drafts and college football and how the college football season is relating to next season's mock draft, just sort of give everyone an oversight of what happens week to week with changes as far as college prospects as they have good games, bad games, injuries, suspensions, and all that normal stuff. Our guest today, and our first guest of 3000 NFL Mock Draft, is Matt Brown of SportsOnEarth.com. Matt Brown, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Can you just give everyone maybe just a brief history on what got you into college football, what made you want to write about it, and perhaps maybe any bias that you might have towards a certain team?
Well, I live in State College, Pennsylvania, and I grew up going to Penn State games. So if I have any kind of bias, it's from that history. The first game I ever went to was Penn State beating Ohio State 63-14. So that's a way to get you into college football and get obsessed with it, which was 21 years ago now. So that was basically when I decided to do this. So here I am.
Cool. And is there anywhere else that people can find you, other sites that you have personally besides SportsOnEarth.com?
Just Sports on Earth. I'm full-time national college football writer there, and find me on Twitter at MattBrownCFB.
Great. Let's start off with our first segment every week, which is Twin Calf, which stands for This Week in NCAA Football. This week, I think the big story, again, is Leonard Fournette of LSU. He has another big game, over 200 yards this week. I should have had this pulled up right away, but overall he's got 73 carries for 631 yards, 8 touchdowns, 8.6 yards per carry in just 3 games. Really playing against not the worst defenses of all time, some decent teams. I know that me and Rob have talked a lot about Leonard and maybe perhaps whether or not he could be the next guy, not necessarily to challenge the rule about underclassmen declaring for the NFL draft, but maybe should he have a right to play in the NFL now? Matt, what are your thoughts on Leonard Fournette and how good he is right now and how good he could be if he was able to play in the league right away?
I think he's pretty close to ready at this point. I mean, I don't know that he was ready last year as a freshman. I think he's taken some pretty significant steps this year. You could see last year that he had the talent, the athleticism. I mean, he's a 6'1", 230-pound monster. I mean, he looked like an NFL back out of high school, #1 recruit in the country. But last year he was a little tentative at times. I think he was finding his way. Really, his vision wasn't great. He was a little impatient, and their passing game problems hurt too. So I think everything's kind of come together this year where you see that incredible athletic ability he has at 230 pounds. Which we saw, especially at the end of last year. He had great games against Texas A&M, against Notre Dame in the bowl game. He's kind of carried that over the first 3 games this year. And, he has quick feet, he has balance, he's explosive, he's impossible to tackle in the open field because he'll run you over. I think guys are scared of hitting him at this point after what happened to Howard Matthews at Texas A&M last year. And, I think their offensive line's very good, but he's improved his vision. He's improved his confidence. He's more patient. And when you add that with all that athletic ability, he's no longer a raw freshman that we saw last year. Now he's the best player in the country. And, he should be allowed to play in the NFL next year. Selfishly, as a college football fan, I'm happy that he's going to be playing for LSU for another year. But he should be allowed to play. It's kind of a ridiculous rule.
Rob, did you have anything that you wanted to add with Leonard's another big game, or anything that you wanted to ask Matt about his Fournette's continued dominance?
Well, one of the points that we've kind of made already this year was that the more that you watch Leonard Fournette, I just think the more you become impressed with the way that he's developing. He looks like, if you look even in his physical, his body shape and his face, I mean, he's 20 years old and he looks 30. So he's like a man playing against boys right now anyway. And I just wonder if by the time we get to next year, when he is going to be approaching a draft that he's eligible to be in, and Matt, I'd love to get your take on this, is although running backs don't generally go early, how early can this guy go? Because there's not an obvious whether someone like Kaya maybe of Miami is going to come forward and be a possible early quarterback pick, but there doesn't seem to be that sort of obvious quarterback and maybe around in 2017, and given that someone like Trent Richardson can go third overall, is there a chance that somebody, maybe even with the first pick in 2017, will just say this he's too good, and there's maybe even a chance that he could go with the number one pick in that 2017 draft?
I think he'd easily go with the top 10. I mean, Todd Gurley would have gone higher had he not torn his ACL, so it's a matter of staying healthy. I mean, I think Fournette is quickly getting into that Gurley category where you're just your mind's constantly blown watching him in terms of he's just physically superior than everybody. He doesn't look like he belongs in college football. And Gurley, I thought Gurley was the best player in the draft last year. And, for a running back to be a number one pick, I don't know if that's going to happen based on, the way things have gone in recent history in the NFL and the way running backs are used. But if anybody can be in that top 5 conversation again and kind of erase the memories of Trent Richardson, it's probably Fournette. And I'll say that Nick Chubb at Georgia could end up being a top 15 talent as well in 2017. There's a lot of great young running back talent in college football right now, but Fournette is just the total package, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, he was a guy who out of high school was compared to Adrian Peterson, who Les Miles compared to Michael Jordan, and he's not Michael Jordan, but he's living up to expectations as maybe pretty soon the most physically dominant running back in college football since Peterson. So, I think top 10 is very doable for him, and we could even see top 5.
Matt, 2012 was a great year for quarterbacks going into the draft. 2013 and 14 wasn't. 2015, we had 2 guys at the top, and they're playing pretty well so far. But one of the themes that we've had so far in our first few episodes of 3000 NFL Mock Draft is that this is another poor quarterback class. Don't see a lot of guys. There were guys getting hype in the summer like Cardale Jones, Christian Hackenberg, Connor Cook. Is there anyone that you see standing out so far through 5 games or 4 games that should be a lock from that quarterback class to be in the first round? Or do you also sort of see that there aren't really any one player for the next class standing out in a great way?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mess. I mean, there was a lot of guys with upside. If you look at Cardale Jones, you look at Hackenberg, who haven't proven it really yet. And I don't know how many quarterbacks I would take in the first round right now. I've been a Hackenberg defender who I thought has been put in a terrible situation. I think he's coachable. I think he has talent. I think he has the arm and all that to develop, but I would not take him in the first round right now unless he shows significant improvement this season. So I think the player I'm probably most sold on, but he still has a ways to go, is Jared Goff at Cal, who is kind of in one of those weird situations where you don't totally know what to make of him as a prospect because the offense he plays in an air raid system, kind of similar to what Texas Tech has run for so many years. But he's different than the run-of-the-mill Texas Tech quarterbacks we saw under Mike Leach. He's got arm strength. He's poised. He handles the position well, and I think Cal can really get on the radar soon with another. They beat Texas, but they'll have some opportunities to get more on the national radar. And I think Goff is a guy who's going to continue to rise. He's a really, really good player who he thrives in that system, but I think he'd thrive in any system. I think he might have the best chance of being the top quarterback out of these guys. Cardale Jones, I don't know yet. Connor Cook, I think, is going to be a solid player, but I've never been sold on him as like a top 10 guy. I think his accuracy is a little bit inconsistent. I think his decision-making is a little inconsistent. So, there's nobody I love in this class. I think Goff is probably the top guy right now. I think, I still hold out hope for Hackenberg, but I'm not going to oversell him anymore. And Cardale has a long way to go, too. I think we got pretty excited about what we saw in the playoff. But clearly, he's kind of all over the map. He's still developing, and he has the arm strength and all that. He's hopefully coachable, but it's strange to see so much uncertainty at the position.
Yeah, it's been it was a bad week 3 for Cardale Jones, and he has a decent week 4 to rebound. Probably the biggest game of the week in terms of, and the biggest jump in the standings was for Utah. Now all of a sudden in the top 10 after they resoundingly beat Oregon. Rob, do you think that after the Bellotti years and the Chip Kelly years and holding on with Marcus Mariota there up until the 2014, do you think that that run is over, and now we sort of go back to the Ducks being, a middle of the pack Pac-12 team?
Well, it's at least a possibility. I think at the moment I would compare it slightly to what Stanford went through. So you have Jim Harbaugh there. He does a terrific job, builds that team into what was a real powerhouse and with a very specific style. They lose Harbaugh. Now, David Shaw's a good coach, and he's come in there and he's kind of kept them ticking along. But they're still not the same team. They're not. I mean, obviously, they've lost Andrew Luck as well. That's going to have a big impact. But I suspect over the next few years, we're going to see Stanford move back towards the middle. They're not going to be competing right at the top end of the Pac-12. And I just wonder if the same thing's going to happen. Chip Kelly was, as much as there was a lot of debate about his future in Philadelphia and how his system is working in the NFL, was undoubtedly a terrific coach who had a system that worked perfectly with Oregon and knew how to fit players into that system. Now, whether they can just keep maintaining that without that structure there, and having watched a bit of Oregon, Matt's written about Oregon over the weekend as well, that just did not look like the same kind of Oregon team that we've come to expect. They've got a bit of a mess of a quarterback situation. Vernon Adams has had injuries, but just hasn't sort of hit the ground running, I think, as they would have hoped. As terrific as he looked at Eastern Washington, taking that next step to be the Oregon Ducks quarterback is a huge leap forward for him, and I don't think he's going to achieve some of those lofty expectations of people even comparing him to Russell Wilson in his situation going to Wisconsin. It's just he hasn't been able to live under that pressure, and he isn't the same type of a talent as Russell Wilson, and it's going to be a struggle for Oregon for the rest of the year now. I mean, that was a crushing defeat, but then on the other hand, I suppose you look at Utah and you say, well, look, this is a really good team. I mean, they walloped really Michigan in the first week, and look what Michigan's done since. They're on a bit of a roll, and they're going to take some stopping in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and Matt, do you think that Utah has a real shot at making the playoffs? And if not, who's a team outside of the top 10 that you think has a good shot or a reasonable shot to jump back into the national championship conversation?
I think Utah is definitely a good team. They're better than they've been in a long time. Maybe, and you can't say enough about what they did to Oregon. I mean, to win by Utah's previous 8 Pac-12 wins were by a total of 38 points. On Saturday, they beat Oregon by 42 in one game on the road, which is just unheard of. I mean, Oregon hadn't lost by more than 7 at home since 2006. So this was just, it was hard to wrap your head around what happened on Saturday night. And so Utah is clearly, in better position. If Travis Wilson stays healthy at quarterback, their defense can be very good. Their defensive front has been physical, disruptive the last few years. Devontae Booker's a very, very solid running back, a versatile guy who can catch the ball. And Wilson has been a better playmaker than he's ever been, and he's always had injury problems. So if he can stay on the field, you like Utah's chances to stay in the Pac-12 race. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I think they'll probably drop a couple games. I think they could lose to Cal next week. They have a bye, which is probably a good thing this week to kind of avoid a hangover after that Oregon win. But they got to play Cal. You got to play UCLA, USC. Yeah, so there's still a tough road, and I think they'll drop a couple games. So if you want to go with outside the top 10, I'll go with the obvious choice. Alabama's still there. I refuse to panic about Alabama after one loss. They lost to a good Ole Miss team by 6, in which they lost the turnover battle 5-0. Most teams who lose the turnover battle 5-0 would have lost by 42 like Oregon. Alabama still almost won that game. And, there's certainly concerns. Jake Coker has not looked great. There's concerns that they turned the ball over 5 times. They've been sloppy. They don't have an identity on offense, which, Nick Saban has kind of dragged Lane Kiffin's name through the mud for that. But I just trust in Saban still. I trust in their talent. They have 5 straight #1 recruiting classes. They recruit better than anybody. And saying all that, they could lose to Georgia on Saturday and maybe be done. But I think still, if you're going to say somebody outside the top 10, Alabama's sitting there at, number 12 or so, they're still as good of a bet as anybody to get in the mix. It's just if they can navigate the schedule after that unexpected loss at home.
Rob, you mentioned Jim Harbaugh earlier about his time at Stanford. Now we look at what he did in San Francisco and how horribly they've fallen apart without him. Obviously he wasn't the only loss that they had, but I don't know if Jim Harbaugh would have quite lost the way that they did this weekend. He goes to Michigan that went 5-7 last year, loses his first game, but now they've won 3 in a row. and blanked BYU, a 22nd ranked team, 31-0. It's pretty unbelievable. I don't know is this something that's for real? Matt, what do you think? Do you think that Michigan is a team that's for real, or and that Jim Harbaugh is the reason he's rallying these guys around the same team for the most part that went 5-7? He hasn't been really gotten his classes in there. Is he that good of a coach, or is it just, well, let's wait and see a little bit longer?
I think wait and see a little bit, but there's clear progress that's been made. I think they drew BYU at the right time. BYU just had a ridiculous first 3 weeks where they went in on a Hail Mary with their backup quarterback at Nebraska. Then they beat Boise State on kind of a similar miracle at the end. And then they go to UCLA and lose a dramatic game close. I mean, there's been no breathers for BYU. It's just been 3 tough games against good opponents that went down to the wire, 2 of them on the road, and then you come back after that, after losing to UCLA, and got to go to Michigan, and it's another tough opponent. And I feel like they've just kind of hit a wall. But part of that is that Michigan has improved. And Michigan's defense, very, very good, which isn't totally unexpected. I mean, for all of Brady Hoke's faults, he recruited fairly well, and there was some talent in place for the defense to be pretty good this year. And Harbaugh has a great coaching staff around him. He put together good defenses at Stanford with the 49ers, obviously. So I'm not surprised to see the defense in good shape. I mean, where the concern was is, can they make explosive plays on offense? Can they do anything on offense? And I think you were worried about that the first few weeks. They didn't look particularly good against Utah. Jake Rudock threw 5 interceptions in the first 3 games, which matched his total for the season at Iowa last year. So there were concerns about that. But what they need is Rudock to be a steady guy who doesn't screw things up, and they need their offensive line to open up holes in the run game. And they kind of did that on Saturday. Davion Smith had a good game at tailback. He did a lot of that on his own. But I think their offensive line's been better, which you expect under Harbaugh. I think the running game's been better. They play good defense. If Rudock doesn't screw it up, then you could be looking at maybe a 9-win team, probably an 8-win team, but maybe even 9. And I think that's pretty good based on where they've been, and it shows they're going in the right direction.
Rob, do you see a lot of prospects on Michigan? Any guys that you would be keeping a keen eye on for the draft?
Not so much. I've not had a chance to watch them apart from the Utah game and really focus on Michigan. I just think this is really good. Doesn't it just emphasize what a great coach that Jim Harbaugh is? And I know that Seahawks fans will struggle maybe to admit that, but what he did in San Francisco, that was a team that year after year struggled and played down to an opponent and had a lot of dysfunction there. Harbaugh comes in, they immediately start winning in what proved to be a really tough division. They went to a Super Bowl, won 3 NFC championship games, and as soon as he bolts for Michigan, you start to see this immediate turnaround of Michigan, that they're starting to be a lot more competitive now, and that they have a chance, as Matt says, to accumulate some wins here, get to a good bowl game. And while all of that is going on, you've got this just a disaster of a performance by San Francisco against Arizona at the weekend, and then Colin Kaepernick, who always kind of needed a coach like Harbaugh to just limit some of his erraticism and sort of influence what he was brilliant at, which was athleticism, the big throws downfield that he can make. And now that he hasn't got sort of that controlling coach in Harbaugh, we're seeing the mistakes, and I mean, 4 turnovers, 2 pick sixes in his first 2 drives, and San Francisco are really struggling. They will come to look at the decision to part ways with Harbaugh and to not tolerate him and to try and work together in that system. They will come to regret that decision possibly for the next 10 years until they find another guy who can come forward. I know a lot of San Francisco fans. There's an awful lot of them over here in the UK. And they are all talking about Jim Tomsula being a one-and-done coach now as a consequence. And it's a little bit sad, isn't it, Kenny? We follow the Seahawks as well as college football. To see what has been such a fantastic opponent reduced to what they were yesterday. And on the other hand, it's kind of funny to see Harbaugh just getting on with his business and doing a good job at Michigan. It's almost a little reminder to the 49ers fans that this is what you could have had.
Yeah, I mean, this brings up so many interesting questions. I try and keep a schedule with what we're going to talk about, but so many more questions pop up, and the one that's popping up now with Jim Tomsula, he could be on his way out. I definitely see. I don't know, it was so bad these last 2 weeks that I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him just get the 1 year, maybe even less than a year. Chuck Pagano, how much longer is Chuck Pagano going to last? Joe Philbin. So my question to you, Matt Brown. College coaches making the leap, who are the top couple of guys there that could make a good transition and actually will be interested in making and interviewing for some of these NFL jobs?
That's a good question. I think Kevin Sumlin at Texas A&M is a guy who's been looked at, although people might back off based on the. It's curious based on what has happened with Chip Kelly to see if anybody backs off on the whole college thing, which I hope they don't. But I think Sumlin is a guy who's been looked at before. I think he probably fits better in the college game because he's such an energetic recruiter. But he's a guy I know teams have had interest in the NFL before, so I think he could be looked at. And now I think about it, my number one answer, though, would be Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, who Notre Dame's having a fantastic season, despite the fact that it's lost its quarterback, running back, tight end, defensive tackle. It's number 2 running back. I mean, it's been a ridiculous run of injuries for Notre Dame, and they're still sitting here at 4-0. They've been pretty impressive almost every week. And they have 3 wins over Power 5 opponents. They have a big game against Clemson this weekend, so we'll see on the road. But, Kelly's a guy I think who's also been kind of widely respected by the NFL. And I wouldn't be surprised if, you wonder, he's a guy you could get frustrated at that job. Sometimes Notre Dame, it's a hard job to sustain success there based on whether it's academic standards or recruiting or just things like that, where it's a great job, but it can be a grinding job. And I wouldn't be surprised if, they had some success and he said, all right, I'm out. I'm going to take my shot at the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, even with some guys not doing so great, then you got other guys maybe doing decently. Bill O'Brien's not doing too bad. Pete Carroll obviously has done quite well. Jim Harbaugh. Dang it, Jim and John. Jim Harbaugh had his obvious success. Shifting gears a little bit, Tennessee and Florida, they played this weekend. It was a close game. Florida 28, Tennessee 27. Rob, you mentioned to me that there were a lot of prospects in this game to watch for. Neither of these teams at this time, I think, is Florida still not top 25 at 4-0. I don't even get that, but I don't understand. Matt, let me understand the format. Let me explain the format a little bit. I'm the guy that doesn't know a lot about college football. Rob is the expert, so I learned from him. Rob, in this Tennessee-Florida game, who are the prospects, and why isn't Florida ranked?
Before we start, I can't believe that Matt didn't mention Jim Mora as a coach. He had such a fantastic time in Seattle as well.
Bobby Petrino.
Yeah, Bobby Petrino and Jim Mora. It'd be great to see them come back. In this Florida Tennessee game, I'm not a fan of any college team. Being in the UK and having not attended any college, but I was still really frustrated watching this game because I just kind of felt there was 2 guys at the front row of the Gators crowd that I think had Vols for life on their T-shirts, and I don't know if either of you guys were watching the game, and they were all the way through. They were very energetic, very enthusiastic about this Tennessee performance, and then at the end they just looked at each other and were like, I can't believe this has happened again. And a week removed from just blowing it against Oklahoma, here they were again, a Tennessee team that has shown some potential to move forward and actually get over this horrible hump that they've had for the last few years and be competitive. And they're being competitive, but just threw this game away. In terms of the prospects that were there, I kind of focused on a couple of cornerbacks. I'm a really big fan of Cameron Sutton at Tennessee and just love the way that he plays. Very difficult to beat him in any way possible. And I think that in a better team, he would stand out and be a much sort of bigger name in terms of a draft prospect. And on the other hand, I'm just not sold at all. A lot of people like this guy, but Vernon Hargreaves, as ever since he sort of came onto the scene at Florida, has been touted as this, big name prospect who's going to go and be a high draft pick. If you look at a lot of the mock drafts at the moment, you will always see Vernon Hargreaves sort of listed amongst the top 20, top 25. And the more I think you watch of him and you actually study his game, the more flaws you see. And in this game in particular, there were, from my count, at least 3 horrible open field tackles. On one particular play, he's gone to try and punch the ball out and has completely whiffed on the tackle and allowed a big gain. There was another where he just didn't use his arms at all to wrap up. And it seemed like every time there was a missed tackle by Florida, you would watch the replay and go, okay, let's have a look who it was this time. And then you'd see Hargreaves on the back of the jersey. And he became a real liability in terms of his tackling. And when you look at some of the other issues that he's had in coverage, and I'm kind of feeling that he could be the next disappointment out of Florida. Ever since Joe Hayden, they've had a lot of big-name quarterbacks sort of coming into the league who people expected to go in either day one or day two of the draft, and they just haven't delivered at all, and some of them have even gone undrafted. And I don't think Vernon Hargreaves is going to drop that dramatically, but I wouldn't want to bank on him, especially in a class that could potentially have, we talked about Cameron Sutton there, but you've got other players as well. Tre'Davious White looks tremendous at LSU. Eli Apple is having a really good start to the year for Ohio State. Will Redmond had a really good interception, yet it was against a freshman quarterback for Auburn, but showed really good instincts to be in position to read the quarterback and make a pick there. You've got Kendall Fuller, who has got the bloodlines and has got the talent and has really flashed a few times for Virginia Tech. When you've got all those players sort of vying to be in the first-round mix next year, I think that Vernon Hargreaves is really going to get pushed down, and the more that teams study him, the more they're going to be put off.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about how players can live off of their high school reputation somewhat and keep moving on with their talent or physical abilities that may be above other players. Matt, can you believe what you're hearing about Vernon Hargreaves and a potential top 10 pick? Do you agree, or do you have a different thought?
I've heard that take from some people, so I've not necessarily studied him as a draft prospect yet, really. I will say one thing about the game Saturday is he was reportedly dealing with back issues. I think one of the Florida beat reporters reported that he saw a chiropractor, had some kind of back specialist on Friday night, and I believe he was kind of dealing with back problems during the game on Saturday. So I would throw that out there if he had
his back rubs, doesn't he? Basically.
So I will throw that out there in case I didn't study. I had the game on, did not watch it closely, but I do agree that it is a potentially loaded draft class at cornerback, and you didn't mention Jalen Ramsey at Florida State, who's a versatile player who can play basically any position in the defensive backfield, who might be a top 5 pick, is probably the best cornerback in college football right now. So there's certainly competition. Tre'Davious White had a great game, as you said. Eli Apple hasn't really been targeted. I like Mackenzie Alexander at Clemson as well. So who's a guy to watch this Saturday against Notre Dame against William Fuller. So I wouldn't be surprised if Hargreaves did fall a little bit based on the competition, and if we'll see this year if he has an inconsistent year. But I'm a little bit surprised to hear that. But we'll see going forward.
Absolutely. So let's move on to another segment. We haven't quite. We may have done this in week 1 with Walter Football, but this week we'll do it with Dane Brugler. We could call this segment something like Mockingbirds or something like that, since we are Seahawks fans. This one is, we're going to look at Dane Brugler. He releases a mock draft. It looks like this one came out today for 2016, and we'll ignore what teams he decided, what record they have. So we'll just go with the players. And I just want to get your thoughts maybe quickly. We've gotten a lot of Rob's thoughts, but we get some second opinions. But then again, some of these players, like I said before, I have not seen this high, and you mentioned one of them earlier. So Joey Bosa obviously has been the consensus number 1 for most players, for most mocks, and he remains the number 1 here. Do you have any disagreement on Joey Bosa, Matt?
No, I don't think we've seen much from him yet this year, but he was suspended the first game. They play 3 inferior opponents. I think he's just kind of the total package defensive end. He can play the run. He's kind of a monster physically. He's really, really, really athletic. He's been an impact player basically since day 1, and was so hard to handle last year. I mean, offenses have. If you watch the Sugar Bowl last year, Alabama spent the whole first half purposefully running away from him. And when you add that, he can defend the run like that, but he's also kind of a terror as a pass rusher. That he looks the part. He's a guy who maybe he's not the number 1 pick. He's almost certainly going to be a top 5 pick. Right.
I think everybody is agreeing with that thus far. Maybe we'll see if some disaster strikes at some point. But this is the big name that we have not even talked about, because me and Rob have talked about a lot of quarterbacks. You mentioned him earlier. Jared Goff is what Dane has as the number 2 pick in the 2016 NFL Draft. Rob, are you blown away by this?
No, I did do a piece on Jared. I actually spent a bit of time watching Jared Goff this week, and I came away quite impressed. I think one of the things that is good to look for whenever you are studying a quarterback and I'd love to hear Matt's sort of take on this. I'd just like to see sort of a natural throw, a guy who looks really comfortable and poised in the pocket and doesn't turn the ball over, yet is able to make those real difficult throws. Now, you see Jared Goff throwing his first touchdown against Washington at the weekend. It's just a tremendous throw, off balance into a real tight spot. The throw is inch perfect on the money, and he has a lot of potential like that. And watching a lot of different quarterbacks over the years, you can see that combination of natural talent and just that poise and that accuracy coming together, and all the good guys have it now. I mean, to compare him to someone like Ryan Tannehill, for example, I always thought looked incredibly naturally talented throwing the ball, despite the fact he started mainly at receiver at Texas A&M. But then there were little things like he would throw blind too often. He would often try and look off a safety and then throw blind anyway and then get picked off. A lot of little mental errors, and you don't see anything like that with Jared Goff. Now, the one thing that I think he hasn't been able to do so far for Cal is kind of elevate them with his play. He's not had a great supporting cast, but he alone sort of performing, despite all the great stats that he's had, has not been able to avoid some pretty horrible defeats. I mean, he shouldn't have lost to Washington last season. It was good to see him leading that team, playing very well, getting past Washington on the road this weekend. And how far can he take this now? Can he keep getting wins? And the one kind of comparison I kept coming to, and I want to see if you can sort of separate from this, and it's not just because they're both tall and thin. I do think they had sort of similar styles, and I really liked Brock Osweiler coming out of Arizona State. I thought he was a pretty good second-round pick for Denver. I thought it was great that he could sit there and learn a little bit, not just from Peyton Manning, but the guy who took him in the draft as well has no doubt passed on a bit of advice as well. And the one thing Osweiler never really did was elevate Arizona State, and he would make some of the prettiest passes that you would see a college quarterback ever make for Arizona State, where he really fired things in, surprisingly mobile, and could pick up first downs with his legs despite the incredible height. He was about 6'6", isn't he, Osweiler? And he had the arm strength and was pretty poised and accurate at times, but again, just didn't win the big games and had too many silly decisions that you just left you really wondering. I mean, Jared Goff, we haven't quite seen that, but can he now lead Cal in a way that Osweiler couldn't at Arizona State? I think if he can do that, and if he can keep winning at Cal this year, then I don't think it's ridiculous to think in a draft when, I'm looking at the Dane's mock draft here, and he's got Connor Cook in the top 5, which I really don't see at all. But I considering Christian Hackenberg and Matt's touched on him, has not maybe had the kind of year to start at least that would put him very much into the top 10. I think that if there is a gap there for somebody to work their way into being an early quarterback pick, and Jared Goff has got as much chance as anybody.
Yeah. Matt, what do you look for when you look for a quarterback? What sort of traits and attributes are you looking for in terms of a college quarterback that you think best translate to being an NFL quarterback?
I think the key is footwork and how you handle pressure, and I think Rob touched on some of these things where can you fit passes into tight windows? You don't necessarily see that with a lot of quarterbacks depending on the system. Can you handle a pass rush, which can make some guys tough to evaluate coming out of college? I remember Blaine Gabbert coming out, and there was not much evidence of him being able to evade pass rush. One, because Missouri protected well and got the ball out quickly, and you just didn't see much of a rush from college defenses against him. But two, because when he actually did it, he failed, and that ended up being his undoing in the NFL. And so I think that's a key that can get overlooked a little bit, and I think that was a negative on Brett Hundley coming out of UCLA. I think it's a negative on Hackenberg right now, who's had an awful offensive line, but I think it's kind of, even when the offensive line's good now, his footwork has kind of just been a mess the last 2 years, and that it's been non-existent. I thought he had good footwork as a freshman under Bill O'Brien, but with the transition to a new offense under James Franklin and just the dire offensive line situation, which was because of NCAA sanctions. I mean, they didn't have any capable bodies. The offense just fell apart, and I think he's a 20-year-old guy who I think he kind of got rattled by the whole situation. And I would love to see Hackenberg trade places with Connor Cook and see what he would have done with Michigan State's offensive line in that offense. We can't see that, so right now it's causes big worries. But I think, getting back to Goff, I think he has an opportunity to really, I think he's just looked more pro-ready than anybody, and he's kind of snuck up on people just because Cal won 6 games the last 2 years. It's been huge rebuilding job for Sonny Dykes there, and their defense has been awful. I mean, they won one game his freshman year. They won 5 games last year. His supporting cast wasn't great, and when you see a guy who in that air raid offense throws for 4,000 yards, you kind of just think, oh, it's another B.J. Simmons or Cliff Kingsbury or Sonny Cumbie. But he does have legitimate talent. He has an arm. He's poised. He has a lot of things you look for. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to, win over doubters and get more national attention. Because I bet, I don't think Cal is going to win 10 games or something, but they're going to probably, I said this the preseason, Cal is probably going to ruin somebody's season because, they have the offensive weapons. They can score on anybody. That they're going to beat somebody, whether it's USC. I think they play at home. They go to UCLA on a Thursday night. They play at Utah. They're going to beat one of these teams at least, and Goff will get some more attention.
Good pull on those air raid names. But I'll tell you this. Luke Falk is going to prove them all wrong and be the one. I'm a Wazoo fan, if you can't tell. I think they play Cal this next weekend, so
yes.
Pray for us. So let's just round out the top 10, and I want you guys to tell me who the worst of these players is, or the one that definitely will not be a top 10 pick. Robert Nkemdiche, Jalen Ramsey, Connor Cook, Jalen Smith, Laramie Tunsil, Ronnie Stanley, Leonard Floyd, and DeForest Buckner. Rob, which of those guys will not be a top 10 pick? I know you've said Connor Cook. Maybe give us another one.
Oh, do I have to pick one, or could I have maybe 3? I mean, I don't like Connor Cook in the top 10 at all. I know a lot of people like Ronnie Stanley. I've got my doubts on him as going that early. There's a lot of other offensive linemen in this draft class that I would put ahead of Ronnie Stanley. And Leonard Floyd, he really flashes every now and again. And I watched him play for Georgia. I can't remember the opponent the week before last, and really liked the improvements that he showed. Rushing the edge looked a lot more threatening. He was playing middle linebacker for a lot of the game. And didn't do too badly and was pretty good in coverage. There was one play for Leonard Floyd where he was tracking a receiver on a little route to the outside, and he stuck with him all the way. And it was as if he was, a defensive back tracking the receiver on that particular play, and he made the play to defend the pass. So there's definitely some athletic potential there. But if you're talking about Leonard Floyd coming in and having a boatload of sacks as a top, why else would he's got San Francisco taking Leonard Floyd number 9, and if that's not to replace Alden Smith, then what is? And if you're expecting Leonard Floyd to come in and suddenly rack up a load of sacks in the NFL, I can't see it. I just think that, one, is he explosive enough to warrant the fact that he's almost skinny, you could say, and he's going to really struggle to stand up to the strength. He's not got much of a punch at all. He's a pure speed guy who works the edge. And I'm not sure that he's quite as lightning fast, like someone like Von Miller was, for example, at Texas A&M to sort of make up for that. And, I like DeForest Buckner. He's not the same kind of athlete, I don't think, as Eric Armstead, and that may hurt him a little bit. I just can't see. I think he will go in a similar range to Armstead, but I just don't see him going in the top 10.
Matt, if you want to debate any of that stuff, we welcome arguments on this thing. So go after Rob. Make it personal, though.
I unfortunately think that he was mostly correct. I don't necessarily agree with Ronnie Stanley. I think Stanley could easily be a top 5 pick. I think we're on the record here agreeing on Connor Cook, who I think he's a nice player. I don't think he's a top 5 pick. I don't think he's necessarily a franchise quarterback. I've never really seen that out of him. I think he's a very solid player. Michigan State's won a lot of games with him, and he can do that. But I don't see him. I don't think he's a top 5 talent in the NFL draft. I think he's, I don't know that he's improved enough with his accuracy, his decision making. I think he's really streaky as a passer. Leonard Floyd is, I always have been waiting for him to do more because he looked like he had such high upside as a freshman, and he occasionally flashes that. He occasionally makes some big plays. He can kind of move around the formation as a pass rusher and blitz from different angles, but I do worry about him holding up against the run in the NFL. We haven't seen much of that. He's never really taken the next step beyond the hype to actually produce like a top pass rusher. And, Jordan Jenkins has probably been a little bit more consistent for Georgia out of those linebackers, but I don't think either has been as consistent as people would have liked. So, I think those two definitely are the ones that stand out to me. DeForest Buckner is not the athlete that Eric Armstead is, but I think he's a better player. And I think, Armstead was never a consistent star really for Oregon, but I think Buckner is he's come back and he's like the one good player on that defense right now for Oregon. The defense is a mess, but Buckner has been very, very solid. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the top 10, but probably in the same range as Armstead, as you said. So, I'll agree with Cook and with Leonard Floyd as the two that stand out to me.
Let's go through the next 10 players, and I want you to tell me which of these guys will go in round 3 or later. So Bugler has these guys in the middle of the first round, and you can just pick one, round 3 or later. He does note that Miles Jack hurt himself, so that could put everything in jeopardy as far as the next season. So Miles Jack, we can keep him out of it. Vernon Hargraves, Kendall Fuller, Ezekiel Elliott, Laquan Treadwell, Reggie Ragland, Kenny Clark, Jack Conklin, Sua Cravens, and Jordan Jenkins. Matt, which one of those guys is going to go round 3 or later?
Oh, I don't know. I like all those guys.
You must pick one.
They're all fine. I don't know that I don't know that Kenny Clark's can go in the top 20. I don't know that Ezekiel Elliott is going to go that high, but I don't think he slips anywhere past the second round. I don't know that Jordan Jenkins goes. I think both of those Georgia guys could slip a little bit farther than they're being currently pegged. So if I had to pick one of them, I guess I would pick Jordan Jenkins. I think neither of those guys has been as consistently dominant as you would hope for guys who have been 3-year starters, been kind of hyped for a while, and have never. They're good players. Jenkins has had a good start to the year. They've both had a good start to the year, but we'll see once they start playing tougher competition. So if I had to pick one of those, I guess I'll say Jenkins.
Rob, what do you think of that?
There's round 3 is quite a dramatic drop, but look, I do think there's at least a chance that Vernon Hargreaves is going to fall a lot more than people think. And it may look like a pretty stupid thing to say, and in 12 months' time we can dig out this little podcast here and we can all talk about the one that I got wrong. But I just think that Hargreaves is going to last into day 2, and the longer that there was other cornerbacks over the last couple of years that I liked more than Hargreaves, who with a couple of character issues. I mean, Jalen Collins, I really liked his tape, and yet there were just 1 or 2 issues off the field, and then he ends up falling and goes into round 2. I wouldn't be totally surprised if a similar thing happened for Hargreaves there. And could he drop to round 3? Well, we'll see. I like Fuller. I don't like Elliott, number 13 overall, and I'd have him a lot further down if he's going to go in round 1, but I wouldn't expect him to go in round 3. We talked about Treadwell last week, Kenny. The Jack injury may determine whether or not he's going to go as early as some people thought. I like Kenny Clark, but how often does his type of player go quite that early? Is he going to be more of a late first round? We've seen other guys. Malcolm Brown was a good example of that, who fell a little bit to New England right into their lap. And then I'd probably have to go with the Jordan Jenkins one, because unlike the one thing that Floyd has got, and size concerns aside, he's got athleticism, and people will probably feel, if we want to take a risk on someone, you'll take a risk with someone with a major upside that you can maybe put a bit of weight on, and you can work with them on certain things. I just don't think that Jordan Jenkins has got quite that snap in his play, and when he goes out to the combine to rush, is he going to put up a fantastic 10-yard split? Is he going to wow everybody with his athleticism? Probably not. So why else is he going to go in the top 20 picks? So I think I'll agree with Matt on that one and go with Jordan Jenkins. He's probably the most likely to fall.
Now let's just wrap this up with the final third of the draft, and I just want you to tell me which one of these guys you absolutely love, the guy that you think is going to actually excel quite a bit when he gets to the next level. I think I know Rob's answer, but we'll see. Sheldon Day, A'Shawn Robinson, Taylor Decker, Tre'Davious White, Shalik Calhoun, Sean Oakman, Michael Thomas, Max Turk, Darren Lee, Andrew Billings, the Patriots forfeiting their pick. You can pick that one if you want. And Adolphus Washington. Matt, which of those guys do you really like a lot?
Give me A'Shawn Robinson out of those, I think. Alabama's front seven usually doesn't necessarily put up big numbers, and the defense gets a lot of attention, but individual players don't always, except sometimes a linebacker. That defensive line is so deep and talented, and Robinson is just kind of a freakish player in the middle. So I think he's going to have a big opportunity this week. They play Georgia. Georgia's a great offensive line. Georgia has Nick Chubb. And, we'll see what he's made of kind of this week, I think. But I think he's a guy who could easily vault up. One other that you mentioned there who has always been a little bit overlooked because he's been overshadowed by his teammate, who you also mentioned, is Andrew Billings at Baylor, who might end up going ahead of Oakman, Billings has been the more consistent player. And Oakman gets all the hype, but Billings could end up sneaking up the board, I think.
Rob, any disagreement on Robinson or Billings, and which guy do you really like a lot?
Yeah, I think that Robinson, if he did last this late in the first round, would be good value there. I just think it's hard to pick one guy from this sort of last third of the first round because there's sort of two or three that I really like. I mean, Tre'Davious White for me is going to go in the top 10. I just like everything about him, having watched him in coverage now. His open field tackling gets knocked by some people, but I think it's better than a lot of people think. We see him in the kick return game over the weekend, scored a terrific punt return against Syracuse and flashed that side of his game as well, that raw athleticism to take that in. He was given the coveted number 18 shirt at LSU, or jersey at LSU, so that means a lot to people who sort of know that program there. And unlike a lot of sort of the big name, I don't know, Kenny, can you remember when Seattle drafted Terrell Simon? There was that picture going around of the LSU guys had put a note in the office for the NFL scouts saying these guys don't show up on time. These guys miss meetings. These guys don't put in full effort. And Terrell Simon was on the list, but Lyle Collins was on the list as well.
Spencer Ware. The Seahawks didn't care about the list at all, apparently.
They just, if anything, the Seahawks used the list as like a basis for their draft board. But there's no danger of Tre'Davious White appearing on any list like that. I just think that teams are going to, they're going to like the tape. They're going to appreciate the tape. They're going to like the athleticism, and LSU are known for producing good cornerbacks now. But more than anything, they're going to meet with him at the combine, and they're going to meet with him subsequently before the draft. And there's going to be several teams picking very early who just say, I've got to have this guy. And there'll be head coaches sort of saying, I want to work with this guy and I want to coach this guy. And there's enough defensive-minded coaches in the league who love working with defensive backs. So I just think that Tre'Davious White is going to be snapped up by someone. But at the same time, I really like Taylor Decker as a guy who could work inside or out on an offensive line at Ohio State, and I like him. Michael Thomas at Ohio State, we've talked about, Kenny, who for me could easily be the first receiver off the board in this draft. And although Ohio State and Urban Meyer have never really had that one guy who is a receiver who puts up a ton of yards, who gets all of the attention, is a go-to guy, they love to spread it around. Thomas just keeps making plays for that team, and every single week just watch him play. And I really like Darren Lee as well, really physical linebacker prospect, again another one that teams are going to love. And then there's Adolphus Washington at the end there, who has got his admirers. So it's basically Ohio State all the way in that final third of the mock draft, and there's a lot of good players. Let's put it this way: if Seattle are going to be, I think in this mock draft they pick 27th overall. If there's that much talent left on the board at the end of the first round, they're going to feel pretty good about it next year.
Yeah, it is interesting that I gave you the top 10 to pick guys you didn't like, and you couldn't pick just one. I give you the bottom 12 to give me one guy you do like, and you couldn't just pick one. It sounds like you just want to flip this Dane Brugler's mock draft around. One of these days we're going to have to get into the psychology of mock draft and what they mean to keep on, like, what's going through people's head as they make them. I think they're trying to be sincere, but at the same time I think people also try to change it so that if you don't change your mock draft, nobody's going to have a reason to go click on it, or if you don't make some extreme things. But I think Dane has done a pretty good job over the years. We got one final thing that I want to talk about. It's reversing. We haven't really. I just want to know. I got two football experts in front of me right now, and I want to get their opinions. This isn't about college football, though. This is about one of the greatest college football players of all time. And I see experts and analysts around the NFL just take all of their knowledge and expertise and, in my opinion, throw it out the window because they don't give a shit unless they're saying something nice about Andrew Luck. So I have to ask you two guys. Andrew Luck, he's got 7 interceptions. He's got 27 interceptions in his last 22 games. He's got fumbles. He's got, the terrible record that in every playoff game in which he's gotten blown out to end the playoff run. Over his last 7 games, he's got a passer rating of 65.7, and he's 32nd in the NFL in passer rating this year. Yet, people keep saying that he's the last guy to blame for all of these mistakes. Last year, he didn't have any weapons, so they added Andre Johnson. They drafted Philip Dorsett in the first round. They added Frank Gore, and Dante Moncrief has stepped up, and he's become the next thing, and he's been becoming really good. And now people say, well, I don't really judge guys on weapons. I judge them on offensive line. And so he doesn't have an offensive line. And really, if you look at Pro Football Focus's numbers, he's about 9th in the amount of pressure he takes, and when he does throw under pressure, his completion percentage is 36%. Compare that to the top guy, Tyrod Taylor, surprisingly enough, who's 75%. Average is probably going to be 60, 55%. And Andrew Luck is the dead last in that. So tell me, in your opinion, Matt Brown, how much of this is Andrew Luck's fault? Is it okay to say that maybe he is still going through a lot of growing pains, or is it really that he doesn't have a good setup around him?
I'm beginning to think you think Andrew Luck's a little overrated.
Using overrated is overrated because people will just shut you down if you say that he's overrated. But if his rating is above his ability, I will say that.
That could be accurate. I think growing pains is probably a fair thing to say right now. I'm still pretty confident that he's going to turn it around. Obviously, it's troubling. It's kind of just a mess. I mean, between an overrated GM, number one, who had Andrew Luck fall into his lap, to, obviously there's problems with Pagano right now. You got to put a lot of it on Luck for sure. I mean, if you make bad decisions, if you don't handle pressure well, things like that. But I still think it's going to turn around. Maybe I'm also in the Andrew Luck fan club, but as every other sports writer, as you said. But based on what we saw from his first couple of years and his skill set at Stanford, I got to think it's going to get better, and because, well, it can't really get worse. So I'm still cautiously optimistic, but yeah, you could definitely give him some blame. I mean, Peyton Manning didn't have much of an offensive line often with the Colts, but he was so good at the line of scrimmage and making adjustments and getting the ball out quickly that he was his own offensive line. So you can't expect Luck to be that right now. He's still young, but he gets some of the blame for sure, and I would agree that people are probably reluctant to do that, and probably,
right,
are always putting him in the most positive light when he's going through growing pains. He's had some problems. He has some things he needs to improve.
Yeah, I mean, everybody makes mistakes, and personality-wise, discipline. I mean, the stuff that Rob talks about with guys like Tre'Davious White, with guys like Melvin Gordon, I believe Andrew Luck has that same tenacity and discipline and work ethic, and is just a guy that's never going to get in trouble once in his entire life, and that's a great thing, and all of that, and the physical abilities as he has. Again, I think it is a bit of a case of if when you come to the league with that much hype and you don't just flat out fail, then people like the idea of seeing a superstar grow before their eyes. It's exciting. And Andrew Luck, he did throw 40 touchdowns last year, and that's all exciting too, and yards are exciting. But there are efficiency problems, and it is not a good team overall. But at the same time, part of the reason is that Andrew Luck has put them in holes by throwing several first-half interceptions in many games. Rob, what are your thoughts as far as Luck's progression? Has he taken a step back this year?
Well, do you know what? I put a lot of risk. Who was Andrew Luck's first offensive coordinator? Does anybody know?
I know.
It was Bruce Arians.
Oh, right.
So right. Luck gets to go into the league, and it's clearly been shown what anybody thinks of Bruce Arians right now, that the guy can coach an offense and he can put a product out there on the field. And that was just fantastic for Luck to be able to work with somebody as accomplished as Arians is. I don't think that Pep Hamilton is 1/10 as good as Bruce Arians at setting a game plan. So what you had in Hamilton's first year was they traded for Trent Richardson, they put him in, and we saw a lot of the Colts. The Colts played Seattle, of course, in 2013, and they decided what they were going to do was they were just going to run the football, and they were just going to run it on countless downs, and they weren't going to put much pressure on Andrew Luck at all. And everybody criticised them because the offence was kind of boring and it wasn't really moving the ball. So they went to the complete opposite and decided that they were going to have Andrew Luck throwing 1,000,000 times, and it was going to be all on him, and Richardson was a bust, and that was going to be the end of that. They were going to just throw out the idea of having a dominant ground game. And it kind of worked for a time last year, but now it's gone back to how, this is what happens when you're putting everything on one guy. I mean, they had issues with the defense last year. They got blown out by New England in a horrific AFC Championship game. So what do? They go and draft another receiver, and as good as Philip Dorsett is, I mean, they were cutting guys in camp because they just had too many receivers, and that was the last thing that Andrew Luck needed, was yet another target. I mean, they've drafted so many players to come in and work in the passing game. Just build the defense, run the football, and use Andrew Luck not as the be-all and end-all, we are going to win or lose with Andrew Luck throwing 40 or 50 times. Their mentality needs to be, we have got this generational talent, and that is what he is. I mean, he is as good a player that's come into the league since John Elway. We have got this generational talent. Let's put the cast around him, which enables him to thrive and succeed. Seattle is I mean, why wouldn't you use Seattle as the perfect basis for that? Because it's exactly what they've done with Russell Wilson. They don't ask too much of Wilson. They ask him to be a playmaker, sure, but it's a playmaker surrounded by other guys who are helping to win the team, not least a fantastic defense. Everything on Indianapolis is on Luck, and when he's backed into a corner, he makes bad mistakes. And I also think there's one other thing. I think that their situation with the coach and the GM, who seem to be in the midst of a lame duck season, is clearly having a major emotional effect on Andrew Luck. And if you just watch him speak after the game, I think the guy's spent. And I think that he feels like Chuck Pagano's future rests on his shoulders, not just the fact that everything in the team rests with Andrew Luck. I think that he feels almost responsible for a coach he clearly loves keeping his job. And so now you're asking Andrew Luck to save Pagano's job and also to win a Super Bowl this year, and while everybody's tipping them to get there, it's just too much for him. And they've abused Luck, they've messed him around, they're not using him properly, and I just think it's an absolute mess in Indianapolis, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's a good point about Bruce Arians is something that I had sort of forgotten about, and because when Bruce Arians was there as the interim head coach while Chuck Pagano was out for a bit, I think that was their most successful that the Colts have really been in the last 3 years, and now with Arians completely out, for over a year now, and with Pep Hamilton and all that stuff. I do think also that Ryan Grigson is incredibly overrated, and when you look at the moves that he's made, it hasn't been to make a better team. It's been to sort of try and see how they can make Andrew Luck look better. And I think that Chuck Pagano will get fired this year because they're not going to win a Super Bowl. And I think that Ryan Grigson probably should be replaced, but maybe that won't happen because he's the GM and all that stuff. It'll be interesting to watch, and I thank you guys for placating me and going along with me going off the rails, just getting your opinions on this current situation, because it is fascinating to me. It is definitely a fascinating situation, not just to see, it's not just Schadenfreude to see someone fail or anything like that. I want Andrew Luck to succeed. It's more of just awe at the media reaction to Andrew Luck. And I do think he will succeed when he's in a better position to succeed. That wraps it up for this episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft. We want to thank Matt Brown for coming on and talking about college football and players and Andrew Luck and all that good stuff with us. Follow him at Matt Brown CFB on Twitter and read everything he writes on sportsonearth.com. Follow Sports on Earth at Sports on Earth. Rob Staten at Rob Staten. And me at Kenneth Arthur S. And please subscribe to the iTunes link of the podcast, 3000 NFL Mock Draft. We'll catch up next week.